Morning and croeso. Welcome to our panel today. We will be discussing representation of LGBT plus people in the mainstream media. This is on behalf of, I'll be hosting on behalf of the Iris Prize Festival and Pride Cymru today. So I'm Matthew David. I'm an actor and producer and writer now based in Cardiff. I think we'll start this off by introducing ourselves. So I'll just introduce you as you go into the as I see you on the screen today. So Oscar, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Oscar. I'm 25. I'm in Cardiff. I'm a writer and puppet maker and blogger in Cardiff. Yeah.
Puppet maker? You didn't tell me that before. That's exciting.
I just remembered it.
Just remembered that you're a puppet maker. That's brilliant. Shai Wei, what about yourself?
Yeah, my name's Joey.
you know.
I'm non-binary. I go by the he, she, they pronouns. I'm part of the organization called Untitled Chapter, which is a BAME LGBT plus community based in Wales. I just graduated from International Wildlife Biology from the University of South Wales, and I'm 24 years old.
Congratulations on graduating.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
But it's like I didn't get my graduation yet, so I have to wait.
Damn. Okay, Joe.
Hi, so I'm Joe. I'm a journalist for Wales Online. I cover LGBT plus and diversity news stories here in Wales. I'm 23 years old.
Jackson. Jackson, your turn.
My name is Jackson. I'm a student at USW. Yeah, sorry. My name is Jackson. I'm a student at USW. I study media culture and journalism and try and be an activist for the LGBT community, and I'm a trans activist. I sometimes host meetings for TSMU, which is a group here in Cardiff. Yeah, and I'm a cosplayer.
Nice.
Nice.
Namish.
Hi, my name is Nemish. I am a data journalist based in Cardiff. I'm 22 years old. I'm from Mumbai, and I identify as gay. My pronouns are he and him.
Well, nice to meet you all. I wish it would be in real life rather than Zoom, but hey, we're in a Panny D, so we just need to adapt, don't we? So it is quite a cute name. I can't claim it. My friend Holly came up with it, but I'm using it now. So why don't we just kick off then and get to the subject at hand? So the first question I've got is: it important to see LGBT plus people represented in contemporary media? So who wants to start us off? Come on, Oscar. I know you're ready.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's really important for there to be representation for the LGBT community in media, because for the past 20 or so years, there's been like the main LGBT representation has been like an attractive white man who's been like the gay best friend to usually a female main character in a film, and he'll just provide advice for her basically just her romance story. And then even now to the past few years, like you might get a trans character, you might get a gay character who has their own love story, but even then it's a really simplified, not very authentic and often very unoriginal representation of LGBT identities.
Great. Yeah, perfectly said. Anyone want to follow up on that? Joe, yeah?
I think, working... Oh, which one?
No, you go, Joe.
I think it personally, it normalizes it, and, especially even though we're kind of going in the right direction, I don't think there's, been enough relatable content out there. In contemporary media especially, I think, working in the media and kind of growing up and studying journalism, we see these kind of trans stories popping up, but we need to be careful that they're not hyper publicized, and that's what is kind of going on. And I think it's really, really important that as we stray into contemporary media, be it TV, film, journalism, we need to stop and we need to think about the kind of us and them approach. So we need to make sure that we're including people properly and accurately. And I think you know, the media especially is quite guilty of kind of portraying people and putting them on a pedestal, but in a completely wrong way. So hyper publicizing those people, especially trans people, and almost alienating them and making them kind of non-human, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Jackson?
Yeah, so I think it's like really important. Like I watch quite a lot of shows on Netflix, and recently Netflix has been very good at providing representation. One show that comes to mind is The Politician. It has a trans character in it with their own storyline about a love life, but it isn't like the show isn't all about them being trans. And majority of the trans guys, like myself included, just want to see a trans character online who is like just there, and it's not the entire story is based around them being trans. I think it's really important to have that sort of representation so that people, because the main reason why people watch reality shows is that what we learn in our course is the fact that they want to see themselves represented in television. And I think that's just as important for anybody in the LGBT community, that we want to see ourselves represented, but not as like the gay best friend or that one trans character. We just want to see ourselves as normal people in a relatable storyline.
Definitely. It doesn't seem like a hard ask, but it seems impossible at times, doesn't it? Jaiwei, what about yourself?
Yeah, actually, it's perfect timing because I want to follow up from what Jackson said. So while growing up in Malaysia, right, it's like everything about LGBT plus is taboo. So finding at that time in Nickelodeon, there was like a series called, back in Malaysia, LGBT plus is like pretty taboo, and then so I'm always trying to get to the internet and try to just watch things and understand things from the internet to find out who I really am. So Nickelodeon was showing this series called Avatar: The Last Airbender, and the second season.
So good.
Yes, Legend
What
of
was
Korra.
the name of it again? What was the name again?
Avatar:
Sorry.
The Last Airbender. Yeah. And then the second series was called Legend of Korra, where the main character was a bisexual. And so I purposely watched the entire series just to get through the second series, just to see a representation of like the LGBT plus community in a mainstream series on the television. And that was really such a big momentous occasion for me, especially in a country where it doesn't support, and seeing it normalized on screen on a huge children television network, it was really inspiring for me. So I like it's very important to see LGBT plus people represented in contemporary media, definitely.
Yeah, that was a huge change, wasn't it? And I remember watching that
Definitely.
moment and being like, this is brilliant. Like, it's,
Yes.
but I suppose it was like, this is really bold, but actually it should be normal, shouldn't it? But hey,
Exactly. But I think that was the starting point.
Yeah, definitely. Namish, what about yourself?
I think the internet was like a really major source of like this kind of content, like to see myself being represented, even though they don't look like me as such. But yeah, the internet brought that to me, and I kind of grew up with YouTube. So like all of these celebrities like Tyler Oakley, Connor Franta, and like I just watch their vlogs and just like see them live their lives the way, like just like being normal, being happy in their lives, living openly. So I think that made like a huge impact, because when I was growing up, I didn't have like any I didn't know anyone who was gay when I was growing up. So it was only through the internet, and like through that I found communities that kind of helped me find that acceptance within myself, that this is okay, because like it's obviously a scary place to be when you don't know anyone, when you don't see anyone in your life, anyone like yourself being represented. So yeah, I think the internet was like a very crucial thing for me to just find more of these characters who are like me, and through that find acceptance within myself as well.
You're kind of going on to my next question there. So where do you go to find LGBT plus content, and is it easy to find? Did you find it easy, Namish, to find that content?
Yeah, because like at that point I feel like the internet was like like you could find things easily. Maybe not on like mainstream platforms, but you could always find ways around it. And there's like Tumblr was like such a big thing because you had like such a growing budding community over there. So like you could look for lists and people would like post recommendations and like where you could go watch stuff. So yeah, like for me it was pretty easy to find.
Good. That's good to hear, I suppose. What about everyone else?
Like, speaking about Tumblr, I think it was such a big influencing factor on me as well because I don't know why, but so many of the people in Tumblr are just so like open and accepting, and then they are like posting kind of awareness about the LGBT culture and also the media in the form of GIFs and also in the form of like videos and little clips and things like that. And so from there, it's kind of where I got my main education actually when I was 16 on LGBT plus and when I was navigating my own sexuality and gender orientation. So I have to give credit for Tumblr, but otherwise I would go for YouTube has a lot of independent short films which they actually publish on YouTube, and that's where I kind of find, and then they get recommended even more. And Netflix has a really good LGBT plus section currently, I think. As what Jackson said, it had a like it's more and more prominent now. I can see it increasing more and more through the years. The visibility is much represented in the media there. So yeah, Netflix I would say, and Tumblr definitely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Who wants to go next? Jackson, you crack on.
Yeah. So as leading on from Joey, the like YouTube community was huge for me. So I first of all like came out as non-binary, and then went on to find out that like I was like they them pronouns don't really fit me. Like I feel more comfortable as a guy or being referred to as a guy. And then I found out about like binding and packing and everything like that. And I was just like I felt overly comfortable trying to find myself within these communities, and I think Ash Hardell has to be one of the biggest helps for me within the community with all of their sorry, I don't know whether I froze then.
No,
sorry.
you're good.
But yeah, the Ash Hardell was fantastic, and then like as Amish said, like with Tyler Oakley and people saying like about how like their journeys, people documenting their journeys and just like seeing them online. But yeah, I like Netflix has a phenomenal list of LGBTQ stuff on their films and whatnot. But yeah, I think the thing about short films on YouTube that irritates me is that it isn't always like I think the families accept too easily. And I grew up in a very not sort of like starting off to be not supportive family. So yeah, it's it was interesting. But yeah, I think it is the more representation the better.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Oscar?
Yeah, I think everyone else has said a huge amount of things that were very relevant to me as well. I think definitely Tumblr, obviously, huge part of it. YouTubers. One thing that I found was really good for me to find stories about myself and my experiences was through webcomics. So I just went through a phase where I was just like webcomics lesbians, webcomics gay, webcomics trans, webcomics non-binary. I just pages and lists and lists and lists. And like, there's a handful of them that are like, go get a roomie. I was kidnapped by lesbian pirates, etc., etc. There's like loads of them that are like really sort of well known among the sort of like LGBT webcomic kind of space. But then like, of all of the comics to kind of come out and be just full of LGBT representation, Homestuck, like, there's one character in the entire series that I think is even considered entirely cishet, and the rest of them are on this massive spectrum of gender and sexuality. And then that kind of, diversifies more as the series goes on. And then kind of as I stop reading comics as much, and like there is a whole bunch of comics that do have like mainstream Marvel Comics has the new, I think they're called the Young Avengers, and they have a bunch of gay characters and non-binary characters and things like that. And then I moved into literature, and since over the past like 5 years, I've been picking up basically any piece of queer written literature. So I'm reading Cinderella is Dead right now. I just read the marked ones. Before that, I read A Royal Rescue. Like, there's a huge amount of LGBT written, LGBT published independent media, which I got really into over the past few years.
I need to get a list off you to start reading some of these.
I have a huge list.
I know.
I have an entire bookshelf in one of these slots just dedicated to gay books.
Oh my god!
Yeah, I mean, you can read my books. I've published 2. If
I'd
anyone
love
wants
that.
to read my book.
Oh my goodness.
Send me up.
Joe, then what about yourself? Do you find it easy to find this content? Where do you go?
So yeah, it's really interesting for me. I am half Iraqi, half English, and growing up, it was very strange. It was a very like one world with my mum and one world with my dad, because he didn't really understand kind of the gayness. So it was quite lonely for me. So I definitely did take to social media and, you know, YouTube and stuff. And especially, I didn't see someone like me who was kind of in between those two worlds, if that makes sense. It was a very unique situation to be in. It really is. And I think I really resonated with Riyad Khalif on YouTube, the half Iraqi Irish filmmaker. And, you know, he published videos where he was sat with his Iraqi dad and his Irish mum, and he was in tears, and they were talking really openly about how he felt due to his religion and his beliefs about him being gay and how it made him feel. And that resonated with me really, really well, and, you know, made me feel kind of less alone. I've had to kind of go through it and find it myself. So it's people in my family, I haven't been kind of, you know, open to queer culture. It was very much kind of like a lot of other people, like a building block that I had to do myself. But, you know, I'm watching series now, Queer as Folk from the 90s. I find that in my job as well, speaking to kind of the older LGBT plus generation, I've had the opportunity to get insight into these programs and, you know, watching them. And at the time, maybe they were controversial, but they make so much sense now, especially going through kind of the gay experience as a UK-based gay person myself. You know, I love watching series like Euphoria. I think that was brilliant. I think just kind of something that isn't washed with kind of the fantasy and like, oh, it's all an amazing experience, because it really isn't. You know, our communities go through a lot, you know, whether that be drug abuse, clubbing, you know, abuse, the dating apps and stuff. Like, it's not always the best out there. Sometimes you go through those struggles, and I've experienced those struggles myself. So to watch things like that, to me, really resonates with me, and it makes it feel more real. So yeah, I definitely owe social media and YouTube and, you know, kind of TV shows, I guess, to me being queer.
Amazing. Just in case anyone doesn't know, the Iris Prize Festival's on this week, and all the content is free. We've got 35 short films in the international category, 15 in the Best British, and I can't remember how many feature films, but they're all free at the moment. So if anyone wants to check some new content out, there's some brilliant films. Just head over to the Iris Prize website or our social medias, and you'll be able to find it there. So on to our next question then. Do you feel there is enough LGBT plus representation in the media? Good question. Oscar, you're shaking your head. Why don't you kick us off?
I think there's LGBT representation in media when it's when it panders almost, like, not even necessarily to the LGBT community. I feel like it panders to what non-LGBT people want to see almost. I feel like there is now a whole show. Like, we've had Pose come out, and I think Pose has been great in that it's been just an entirely LGBT show. And then before that we had The Switch, though The Switch was a bit more independent. But, you know, there is media coming out that is massively focusing on LGBT identities, and like Sense8 and was it Banana Cucumber? I can't remember that one.
Yeah, the Russell T Davies one.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it ever. But so we've had content that was like hugely invested in stories of LGBT identities, but I think in general everyday media, less so. It will be like one or two characters, and then even then the secondary character will just be a love interest for the first character, I think, and then it will be kind of just within the constraints of what non-LGBT people are comfortable with seeing, or what kind of narratives they want to see. And I feel like they don't necessarily always authentically portray LGBT experiences in regular media, and I think that's going to be an issue for a long time, personally.
Yeah, who wants to follow up on that? Joe? Yeah.
Me.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't talk about LGBTQ representation in the media without talking about Russell T Davies. I mean, he is like the biggest contributor as like a writer for the getting his shows out there. I mean, when we had Doctor Who come on and we had Captain Jack Harkness, I mean, he was a massive inspiration, and to see a show that was watched by absolutely millions of people have a main character which was so out there with their sexuality, and it just wasn't like a like Jack's gay, that's it. It's sort of like a Jack likes everybody, and he's like it was just a thing that he flirts with everyone, and I absolutely love that. And like Russell's also done like amazing shows like with Banana and Cucumber, like Oscar said, and I think like it's getting better, the amount of representation that's out there. Like I know other media-wise performances, like my friends are running a podcast. I have like so they're running one called We Know None, which is a queer podcast with a supernatural element, which is absolutely fantastic, and I've been blessed to be a part of it. And then we've got their company's called Calliope Productions, and they're absolutely fantastic. Definitely go check them out on things. So yeah, but like getting podcasts, I think, are the one where you'll find quite a lot of LGBTQ representation, and it's not like you can think about it more. And they're not afraid to put out stuff for the LGBT community, like not to pander to the non-LGBT community, because they are LGBTQ writers, actors, voice actors, and I think that's really important. Like within the representation we have, I think it's more important to get like trans actors to play trans characters, or gay actors to play gay characters. I think that's like the main issue that we have. But yeah, there definitely needs to be more of it out there. But I think we need more advertising and more information out there, so that people people who aren't in the community can be informed. Because like Joe said, it's not easy for us. Like it isn't how they make out to be on TV. It's not like Hollywood, you get accepted immediately. Nothing's like that. And we do go through a lot, especially like dating apps and stuff. Like trans communities fetishized, and like that's not a well-known thing. I think it needs to be like more shows need to cover more hard-hitting things that like people in the community go through, and not just what the non-LGBT community are comfortable with seeing.
On the note of Russell T Davies, I think Banana is now available on Netflix. And
I've just finished watching it.
Great. And I think It's a Sin is his new series, and that'll be out soon. So Joe, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so I would definitely say there is representation, but it's not accurate representation really of our community. You know, I did my dissertation on the gay stereotypes in RuPaul's Drag Race and Queer Eye, and you know, that was an open survey, and a lot of those people kind of agreed that the stereotypes they see on camera, because they are like, if a group of, you know, gay men are really interested in fashion, food and stuff like, and interior design, like it is playing to the stereotype. And my concern is, and it's no fault of anyone's own but our society, I guess, and Richard Dyer, who was a scholar from years ago, touched on this. It's the idea that playing to stereotypes is kind of one of the only ways that we can be accepted in the mainstream society that we live in. So if you know, a cis straight person were to watch a series when it was full of stereotypes that they've encountered, they're going to feel more comfortable and they're going to watch it. Whereas if you give them I don't know, a storyline about a queer person of color and the tragedies they go through in their life, not everyone can resonate with that. So those platforms are not going to run something like that often because they know people won't, it doesn't affect them. They can't really kind of vibe with it. And that's the problem. We're not seeing enough of, you know, kind of real lives of queer people being portrayed. And, you know, I think the shows that we talked about are kind of a really great push for that. But, you know, I haven't heard of Banana Cucumber before, and if I haven't, I'm sure a lot of other people haven't either. So they're not easy to find. It's not kind of something that you know about and you're like, oh yeah, everyone knows about this one. It really isn't. You have to kind of do a little bit of digging. Like with me and Queer as Folk, like I wouldn't have known about that unless someone told me about it. It's not in the known unless you are a part of the echo chamber that knows about it. So yeah, I definitely think although we're increasing representation is, you know, drag kind of becomes to fruition, that's one part of our community, but saying that it pushes to the other side, you know, other forms of drag, you know, women in drag, women have been isolated from that category, and no one seems to care because the wider society hasn't encountered, you know, drag kings as often, or women who do drag as often, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like a push needs to be kind of, something needs to be held accountable to make sure that the stories of the future are more inclusive of our real life stories, not a stereotype.
Naimish, how do you feel on the subject? Is there enough?
Yeah, I think there's definitely issues with queer stories. Kind of, it's harder for them to break into the mainstream because there's only, like, not everyone might relate to it, of course. But we've seen that change with something like a Schitt's Creek, which everyone seems to love and has watched. So yeah, I think I don't necessarily have a solution. Like maybe more advertising and making more people aware, but I'm not super sure on how you can go about doing it. But I also feel that a lot of the times the stories that you put out, they're more they're gay characters. You don't see as many lesbians, you don't see as many bi people, you don't see as many trans people. So I feel like those stories need to be explored, and beyond that, even within those communities, there is a lot of diversity, which I don't think I see. But yeah, I think that will hopefully change as people become more and more aware of it.
Fingers crossed. Joy Wei, what about yourself?
I think mainstream media is like generally kind of afraid of offending some parts of communities which are still not open to the LGBT plus people, and how actually normal it is to have LGBT plus people around the community. Because I heard from statistics that 1 out of 10 people are from the community itself, but nobody knows how normal it is. So just to, I think, like there was a Italian LGBT plus film which used veganism to kind of like come out, so to kind of like show how ridiculous it is to come out as, you know, I'm vegan, but instead of I'm gay, like they made the gay characters look so normal, but he had to come out to his dad as I'm vegan, and it was such a shock horror thing. So for it, like I think as long as you normalize how everything, how normal actually it is to mainstream media, then the more people would be accepting, and the more mainstream media would just put out the representation out there. But also it has to do with region. It's not just, you know, Western media showing representation only in Western media. It has to really touch all corners of the world, because in my country, Malaysia, when Beauty and the Beast came out, and because Gaston's sidekick, is it LeFou? Yeah, because he was gay, they wanted to ban Beauty and the Beast in Malaysia just because of that. And then Disney had to kind of like tell them that if you don't show the film in Malaysia, then we would boycott all the other Disney films in Malaysia. So they had to show Beauty and the Beast in Malaysia. And also for the Queen movie, the newest one, because they had to cut out all the the gay scenes in the Freddie Mercury story in Malaysia to show to the audience. So the audience basically only got to know half of the story when it was showing on screen. So I think even though representation is out there, it really has to still kind of touch all the other people off screen. I mean, who are from other regions as well. You can put a lot of representation, but if it doesn't touch people, if it doesn't reach out to people, nobody would know, the real story behind what people want to actually express on screen.
So on that note, you can kick us off on my next question, actually. So are the right people watching the LGBT plus content, or are we just talking to ourselves?
I think it depends on whether all the films are just shown within a community or within like a wider public, because I think if it's just shown in maybe a Pride festival or not maybe a huge film festival, which is having a range of movie genres or show genres, then it wouldn't touch necessarily the people who would just click into the LGBT kind of content. If you want to target the wider community, especially transcending ages, transcending generations, you have to target like not a specific range of people, not the LGBT community, but everyone generally, and not just everyone, but from different content for different countries, the content for different languages, different cultures. It has to transcend all these borders in order to get accepted, and also to just get the message out there to a diverse range of backgrounds.
Does anyone want to add to that question?
I think touching on kind of like we're only going to be heard here, I personally think that echo chambers can be quite bad, if I'm honest, for our community sometimes. A great example would be, the general election, and, everyone thought another outcome was going to happen, and it didn't happen because people were so immersed in social media. But what you're doing there is you're following things that you only like, and, the people who follow you are kind of have the similar interests. So if they're broadcasting and kind of sharing stuff in those platforms, then the same people are going to see it over and over again. And, Naimish said he doesn't have a solution for something we were talking about before. I don't have a solution for this either. I'm not entirely sure how we sit down with people who don't necessarily agree with, LGBT content and kind of having that conversation of, please, like, hear us out. Let's kind of have a discussion. Why don't you view this and kind of change your mind, But, I think it's down to influence as well, especially lately. The idea of being LGBT plus has never been more dangerous, especially with things like the LGBT Alliance popping up. People like J.K. Rowling kind of having such an influence, especially when she, created a massive platform, a movie platform that people watch, and people are invested in that. So people are going to trust people like her. So the idea of manipulating kind of the idea of being trans and the negative connotations to maybe like conversion therapy or whatever, people might listen to people like her. The LGBT Alliance don't know much better because they haven't interacted with us, and they're taking kind of their information from those types of people without interacting with the LGBT community themselves. And they've already made the decision in their head that they're not going to interact with, media that we put out there. But it's interesting. And, I don't necessarily have the answer. I don't think anyone really does, but I think we need to be careful in the way we need to think more about how we distribute the information. So it's all great coming together and sharing these amazing things as queer people, but then how do we ask ourselves, how are we going to get it out into the mainstream? Which I think is really interesting, and we still have a lot to do.
Oscar, you're nodding a lot there. Do you want to add to that?
I think everyone's made really good points. It's really hard if you're trying to actually get things mainstream. As someone who's written LGBT literature, I feel like when you're creating LGBT content, you make it primarily for your LGBT audience. So I'm quite a fan of like these. I list off anything that I'm enjoying, but like I'm quite a fan of these whole bookshelves and lists of films and stuff that we as LGBT people can consume. But I do understand that like getting stuff out to a wider audience is a much more complicated thing. And I think kind of the Disney situation is a big one to go for, because they kept being like, oh, we're going to make Elsa gay. And then everyone's like, okay, cool, make Elsa gay. And then they didn't. And and it was kind of like, how much are we going to constantly beg and demand and like scrape around the feet of these huge companies that don't care about us, when we could turn around and go, we all need to collectively uplift this LGBT made LGBT story. And like, it's hard because, again, I don't have the solution, but there's, I suppose, a certain amount of like, we as a community, do we choose instead to support major productions that only hint at our identities, instead of going towards LGBT made, LGBT presented, like, you know, shows that will give us all of the representation we desperately ask for? And we just kind of maybe don't really pay that much attention because it's not, you know, Big Mouse or whatever. And I think it's kind of, I don't massively have a solution. My solution is to go and make everyone you know read the books that you're represented in. But I think it's, yeah, there's, on the grand scale, it's maybe boycotting, it's maybe making petitions, it's maybe kind of more visible activism. But on a very low personal level, it's going, oh, my friend, you know, one of my friends is cisgender and I've come out as trans. My friend doesn't know much about trans identities. Why don't you watch this 6-episode show, The Switch, which is about trans people? Why don't you watch Pose? Why don't you read this book? Why don't you read this comics? Like, I suppose on a very single independent level, it's just personally recommending things as far and as wide as you can to you people who you know who aren't LGBT.
Yeah, perfectly said. Namish, yeah?
I feel like there is a case to be made for putting pressure on these big production companies to like push for more LGBTQ plus content, because I've seen that happening in India actually recently. So we got rid of our gay criminalization laws in 2018, and ever since that happened, I've seen more and more gay characters in movies, at least. So that happened in 2018. 2019, we had a film about a lesbian couple. Whereas the same thing that happened, it was a similar story that came out in like the late 90s, and people vandalized theaters and burned posters. So we've definitely seen a change. And the good thing about that movie was that it was written by a trans writer, and the actress who played it was one of like the biggest stars in Bollywood. So I feel like definitely if like bigger production houses and like bigger actors and actresses who are like more popular, if they come together and if they create these kind of stories, it'll capture more mainstream attention. Another thing that they did, a movie that came out in 2020, it was about two gay men. And it was essentially like all the makings of like a classic Bollywood movie with like comedy, and like it was a lot of dance numbers and sequences, but with two gay men. So I think that formula was kind of like a thing that attracted Indian audiences, and it did quite well at the box office. So I think because like we don't really have that many out gay actors in Bollywood, I think this is working really well, where like mainstream actors and production houses are coming together to create these big movies. But obviously, in markets where you have these kind of people where like they're out and proud and they're actors, I think big production houses need to come together with them and create stories that are kind of massy. Like for instance, Love, Simon is a great example. Even though they didn't like really, the main actor wasn't really gay, but yeah, I think those kind of stories would work really well, I feel, and like people who may not necessarily be gay would still watch it. So book adaptations, that's another thing. But if more of those happen, I think more and more people might be inclined to watch them.
Yeah, definitely. Jackson, if we come to you, and then I'm going to open the floor to questions before we wrap it up. So, Jack.
So I think it's like really important for the fact that like mainstream people, like as we were talking about, like with the Kardashians, Caitlyn Jenner coming out. I think that sort of gave a platform to non-LGBT people being like, oh, hang on a minute, so this is what trans is, and then we got to see her transition. But I think you don't know about like trans actors unless you go out there and research. But Jake Graff especially is doing some absolutely phenomenal work on with trans people. Just released like a short film that he wrote, and it was absolutely phenomenal. It pretty much captured what goes on inside of our heads, sort of thing, and what we think. And I think it's really important to publicize the things that trans people think about a lot, and like short films that are made. Like, I think if we could get companies like the BBC involved with that, that would be absolutely phenomenal. Just like have it on, like, even if it's like just on BBC Three and then moved over to like BBC Two, where it's like more personal stories. But I think it's phenomenal where we have every now and then we have a documentary about trans people, like, and how like with Seahorse and with Jake Graff and Hannah and them having a child. It's absolutely like I thought that was phenomenal. And Seahorse was so inspirational. It showed trans men that they can have babies, and like the struggle that goes with having to go through all of this dysphoria so that you can get this gorgeous child. But it was just like Freddie was absolutely strong, and my heart goes out to him. That was absolutely phenomenal. And I think like more content like that needs to be out there, especially. I think just the more representation, the better. The more trans actors, the more gay actors we can get, then we can like get jobs for the minorities, and then get writers from the community. And I think that's just like the main important part that like I'm trying to get across.
Yeah, totally. And in normal real life before the Panny D, as I keep calling it, Jake and Hannah often come to Iris. I actually went to school with Hannah. Lovely, lovely woman.
Wow.
Yeah. I'll tell you a story in real life. Yeah, brilliant. They're always here at Iris normally with their films, and they are dearly missed this year. So I'm just going to go to the chat and just, because I know we had one question. We got a question from Kate. Do you think a big part of the problem is that mainstream media is not broadcasting or publishing content written by LGBT plus creators? Who wants to answer that?
I think it is. It is definitely a thing, especially. So I remember there's this TV show called The Real O'Neills. It's about like a gay teenage boy growing up in America with a conservative family and like coming out. That show was given like the 11:30 slot on like this mainstream TV channel. It's like 11:30 in the night when like no one's watching TV, everyone's gone to bed. That's when they'd play it. So yeah, I think they need to like publish it in like more prominent spots, and like obviously start publishing more of it for sure.
Yeah, same in mainstream TV. I remember I was a kid and I was going out with my family to a hotel, and then my family just put on the TV. We were in Australia, and that time like the channels were already, they put out multiple different kind of content, and there was this one show. It's an American show called I Am Jazz. It's about this transgender female who lives in America. So she's born male, but she transitioned to female, and it's about this kid's life, and you get to see her daily life. So I remembered I was just frozen to this TV screen, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this is the first time I'm seeing on the mainstream TV that it's just showing the lives of somebody like me navigating my gender identity. And so I just switched off the TV. I waited for my family to go off, and then I came on and switched on the TV and just sat there watching it. So I think that mainstream television and just mainstream media is a very important portal to actually show that, to people who are questioning or maybe not even knowing their sexuality yet, that actually, hey, you are not alone in this world, and there are people around you like you, and there are ways to reach out to the community around you as well. So it does play a big part.
I'd maybe touch on, people like Russell T Davies. I think an asset to doing stuff like that. Queer as Folk, awesome. An actual insight into kind of what gay men, I'm speaking for here, kind of went through in that time. The whole sexual vibe of it stayed true to like what it is about going out clubbing and kind of what you do experience. And I thought it was amazing. I think the new is it a series coming out, The Sin, with Ollie Alexander?
It's a Sin, yeah.
Yeah. Again by Russell T Davies, and I trust that it's going to be great. And maybe from his point of view, maybe it is because he's gone through it himself. He kind of has an idea into people and what would resonate with people. But I also think we've seen like big blockbuster series like Pose and American Horror Story, for example, and which do have the aspects of people of color and like queer people all kind of put into one and to create these amazing stories. And I've spoken to people about when Pose was released, they couldn't believe it because it was so accurate in terms of kind of what they experienced and kind of the hardships, but also the fun side of it and everything in between. So I think maybe it doesn't always have to be created by LGBT plus people, but maybe allies with the platform, using that platform to give us the bolster that we need. And that's exactly what we're seeing now with things like the Black Lives Matter movement. People of color are kind of openly saying, look, we've done this for so many years. We need people to give us a boost, to give us kind of recognition to what's going on. And we've seen real change in that. So I think it's kind of similar here. It's kind of like working with people of color, queer people, trans people, listening to their stories properly and then elevating them. And that's done wonders. We've seen things like Pose and Queer as Folk, and it's all been amazing. So, yeah.
Anyone else want to add anything before I wrap it up?
I think I'd like to add that I think definitely having LGBT writers writing LGBT stories, but also as escapist pieces. I think there's great content that tells our actual stories, and that's really important, and that's great. But part of the reason I list a lot of webcomics and books is because there's so much escapist content. And that will be like if you're someone who doesn't really like reality stories, like you've never been interested, but you do like a fantasy story or you do like a sci-fi, there's loads of LGBT stuff that is your, just like whatever fantasy story you want, where a character gets an amulet and has to go and save the world. You can absolutely find that book, but the character happens to be trans and there's a gay couple in it. And I think, as much as I'm really, really a fan of all this content that shows off the reality of our experiences, definitely we need LGBT writers to also accurately write LGBT identities in very escapist literature where people aren't experiencing hardships for their identities.
Jackson, yeah.
Yeah, jump in. So I think one of the biggest issues with the fact that we have so many writers out there is queerbaiting in television programs. It's not actually talked about that much, especially with Sherlock. It was queerbaited a lot with John and Sherlock. There's queerbaiting in Supernatural, even though there is an LGBTQ character. There's a lesbian called Charlie. It's a phenomenal storyline, but it would have been better if we had some mainstream representation rather than just one character that got killed off. I think more big shows, big companies like Warner and Warner Brothers, if we could get the CW and the BBC to sort of produce main TV written by and starring LGBTQ people, I think that's really important. More book adaptations like Simon versus the Homo sapien agenda getting turned into Love, Simon. I think more books like that, like Heartstopper or something, could be turned into different things. We do have amazing YouTubers trans YouTubers, for example, Noah Fiance and Phoenix Stone. There's queer music out there like Cave Town, trans singer. And I think it's just the more this gets publicized and advertised to those to the community and people outside of the community, the more people will seek information and find out and sort of expand their views. And then like once that happens, then we can get more and more people within big companies and like get more of that writing out there.
I'm going to wrap it on that note, guys, because unfortunately we don't have time. Sorry for anyone that's had questions we haven't got round to, but this is like a huge topic and an amazing topic, and you guys have been so good at talking to us about it, and thank you for your openness. Don't forget that Iris is still on for another 2 days, so please check us out on our socials. And yeah, thank you so much. I've learnt loads today, so I appreciate it. I just hope I can see you all in real life soon. And yeah, thank you. Have a lovely weekend. And yeah, be safe, everyone, okay?